Hi, mathematicians. Today, you are going to want to make sure that you have your fraction strip from last week. I attached it in Schoology again. This is something you want to hang on to. You can use this to help you. This is a great tool to continue with our comparing fractions. It's very helpful, okay? So if you do not have this, stop right now, have mom print it out or copy it or something, okay? You are also need your additional practice and your volume 2 math book. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and we're going to talk about comparing fractions again with a word we probably haven't really heard before. They call it benchmark fractions. So they'll explain what that is in the video, and then we'll do some practicing together. Okay, all right, here we go.
How can benchmark numbers be used to compare fractions? Think about this question during the lesson. Carrie wants to buy 2/6 of a container of roasted peanuts. Alan wants to buy 2/3 of a container of roasted peanuts. The containers are the same size. Who will buy more peanuts? What are you asked to determine? What is important to know before you compare fractions?
All right, well, they gave us different fractions of the amount of peanuts in the jar, right? And they want to know, do you remember, who has the most peanuts? So that's where this comes in handy, okay? But let's keep watching and see some other strategies.
You are asked to determine the person who will buy more peanuts. Before you compare fractions, it is important to know that the wholes are the same size. You can compare fractions to commonly used benchmark numbers, such as 0, 1/2, and 1.
Okay, so that's what they're referring to when they say benchmark numbers, okay? So we're familiar with 0, we're familiar with 1, and then we know 1/2 is in between that 0 and that 1, right? That's kind of a good visualization, which you can also refer to on your fraction bar or strips.
Compare each fraction to the benchmark number 1/2. Then see how they relate to each other in size. 2/6 is less than 1/2. 2/3 is greater than 1/2. Without looking at the containers, how can you tell that 2/6 is less than 2/3?
All right, they're going to show you a strategy. But if you notice 2/6 and 2/3, they have a number that's similar, the 2, right? And the 2 is on top. Do you remember what that's called in fraction language? The numerator. Okay, so it's really important to pay attention because there's a couple little tricks that we will keep practicing to help us remember. But if the numerator is the same, let's see what they tell us to do.
You could tell that 2/6 is less than 2/3 because the numerators are the same and you can compare the denominators. The fraction with the greater denominator is less than the other fraction.
So that's a little backwards to us, okay? So let's stop and think about that. So if the numerator, the number on the top is the same, you want to look at the denominator, but it's actually the opposite. The greater denominator is actually the smaller fraction, okay? The smaller denominator is actually the bigger fraction, okay? And we'll keep practicing that. But if the numerator is the same, you look at the denominator. The bigger denominator really means the smaller fraction. And the smaller denominator really means the greater fraction, okay?
missing symbol.
All right, so then we've got,
Select your answer.
we've got our greater than symbol, we've got our less than symbol, and we've got our equal to symbol. All right, so if we have the picture here or the fraction strips to help us, we know which one's greater. Is 2/6 greater or is 2/3 greater? Just by looking at the picture, we know 2/3 is greater, right? But then pretend like that picture's not there. And remember that strategy we talked about. If the numerator is the same, the smaller denominator, it's the opposite. It's really the bigger fraction, right? And the bigger denominator is the smaller fraction. So, which fraction is greater, 2/6 or 2/3? The alligator mouth always eats the bigger number. So it's pointing this way. It's eating closer to 2/3, right? So let's see if we're right.
2/6 is less than 2/3.
Remember, 2/6 and 1/3 are equivalent fractions.
Alan will buy more peanuts than Carrie. Now you know how benchmark numbers can be used to compare fractions.
All right. A little bit of background on what we're going to do today. Okay, so let's make sure that you have your volume 2 math book and you also have your fraction strips. Okay, and while I'm sharing my screen with you, I would like you to turn to page 503. Okay, 503. And remember, sometimes I've got to share it 2 times. $503 in your volume 2 book. All right, so you should be on 503. You should also have your fraction strip available. Okay, I'm going to actually flip it this way. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at number 4. Okay, so they've got those benchmark numbers. They've got 0 and they've got 1. And they want us to figure out which fractions are closer to 0 than to 1. And they have all of these fractions: 1/8, 1/4, 6/8, and 3/4. Okay, well, let's look at our fraction bar, our fraction strips. Okay, so up here is 1 whole, right? So we want fractions and those strips to be pretty small. They have to be pretty small because they're closer to 0 is what they're asking us, right? So if we look, I'm going to scooch over just a little bit. Let's look at 1/8. 1/8 is pretty small. Do you agree that 1/8 is closer to nothing than to 1 whole? Yes, absolutely. So 1/8 would be closer to 0. Go ahead and write it down. What other, and we can cross that off. What other fraction? 1/4, all right, here's 1/4. 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, that doesn't look close to 0, does it? Or 3/4. 1, 2, 3. Those last 2 seem pretty big. Do you agree? So 1/4, if you look at 1/4, that's a lot closer to 0 than the other 2, right? So 1/8 and 1/4 would be our answer for that. So we can cross off that one. So now they want to know which fractions are closer to 1 than to 0. All right, well, we have 2 left. We've got 6/8, which we looked at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's pretty close to 1. right? And then what's the other one? 3/4, 1, 2, 3. That's pretty close too. Those are equivalent fractions. Did you notice that? Look, 1, 2, 3/4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. They're the same size. They're equivalent fractions, okay? So 6/8 and 3/4. Those ones are bigger. They're closer to 1 whole. All right, use the two fractions with a denominator of 8 to write a true statement. Blank is less than blank. Okay, so we've got 1/8 and we've got 6/8. Which one is smaller? All right, let's look at this. 1/8 and 6/8. Well, we talked about in the video, if the numerator is the same, we look at the denominator to help us, right? But what's the same here? The denominator is the same. So I love when the denominators are the same because it's not tricky. You just look at the numerator and the smaller numerators, the smaller fraction. The bigger numerator is the bigger fraction. And if we look here, we can figure that out. Here's 1/8. That's pretty small, right? 6/8 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to here, right? I would rather have this much cake than just this itty bitty piece. Do you agree? So 1/8 is less than 6/8. 6/8 is the bigger fraction. Okay, so let's refresh our memory on that. So now we're talking about if the denominator is the same, the bigger numerator is the bigger fraction. The smaller numerator is the smaller fraction. Okay, no opposites or anything tricky like when the numerators are the same. Okay, I know it's a lot. We'll keep practicing. All right, so let's keep working. In 7 and 8, choose from the fractions 2/3, 7/8, 1/4, and 2/6. Which of the fractions are closer to 0 than to 1? All right, so we're still doing the same thing. Look at your fraction bar. See if you can figure it out. Which fractions are closer to 0? Okay, well, 1/4 is pretty small. Do you agree? Yeah. So 1/4 is going to be closer to 0. What's another one that might be close to 0? Take a minute. Let's see. We've got 2/3, so that'd be to here. 7/8. 7/8 would be all the way over here. That wouldn't be right. Or 2/6. What do you think? 2/3, 7/8, or 2/6? Write down which one's the next smallest fraction. 2/6, right? And right now we can't do anything with our numerator and denominator tricks. We just kind of have to look at the fraction strips, which is why it's so important to use that. Use your tools to help you. All right, then, so we have 2 left. We have 2/3, 1, 2, 2/3. Yep, that's pretty close to 1, isn't it? You count 1, 2, go up. That's pretty close to 1. So 2/3 is close to 1. And then 7/8, we know 7/8 is pretty close to 1 whole, right? So 7/8 would be closer to 1. Okay? So now we've got all these fractions and we have to compare them. We have to either figure out if it's less than, greater than, or equal to. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at number 9. And it also gives you a little tip here. Remember that you can write equivalent fractions, use models, number sense, or benchmarks to help you compare fractions. So we're using our benchmark our fraction strips to help us, right? But we're also going to remember those tricks that Mrs. Harp told you. Okay, so take a minute and look at number 9 and see if we can figure this out without our fraction strip. And I'm hiding from you. All right, here we go. 5/8 and 7/8. What's the same? The denominator is the same. We love when the denominator is the same because then we just look at that top number and the smaller number is the smaller fraction. The greater number is the greater fraction. So where would we put our alligator mouth? What's greater, 5 or 7? 7, right? So our alligator mouth is going to be eating the greater number, 7/8. And if we look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/8 would be right here, right? 6, 7/8 is all the way over here. So we know 7/8 is greater. 5/8 is smaller. All right. Oh, we've got another one where the denominators are the same. We love those ones. Then we just look at our numbers. 5 or 2, which one's greater? 5, right? So 5/8 is greater than 2/8. Okay? All right, and then we can also compare by looking at our fraction bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/8. And then we've got 2/8. We know 5/8 is greater. It's closer to 1 whole. All right. Oh, look at number 11. Number 11 does not have the same denominators. It has the same what? It has the same numerators. So remember, we have to think the opposite. Even though 6 is a bigger number, not when it's down at the bottom. We pick the smaller denominator. That's the greater fraction. Okay, so 3/4 is greater than 3/6. And if we look, we've got 1, 2, 3/4, and then 1, 2, 3, 6. 3/4 is greater. Okay, so we think opposite if the numerator is the same. I want you to try to do number 12 by yourself. Number 12 has the same numerator. So remember our trick. We think the opposite. We look at the denominators. Which one's actually going to be greater? 4/6 or 4/8? Draw your alligator mouth eating the greater fraction. All right. Well, hopefully you remembered that it's the opposite. Even though 8 is bigger, not when it's down at the bottom, okay? Not when it's the denominator. The 6 is actually going to be a greater fraction, 4/6. Did you get that right? The alligator mouth should be eating 4/6, okay? All right, you guys are doing great. Oh, another one, thinking opposite. The numerator's the same. We look down at the denominator. Don't get tricked. 2/6 is not the greater fraction. What's the greater fraction? 2/4, right? And if we look, here's 2/6. Here's 2/4. A lot bigger, right? All right, last one. What's the same on number 14? The denominator. We love when the denominator's the same because then we just pick the bigger number on the top. The bigger numerator is the greater fraction. And if you're not sure, use your bar to help you. 2/3 or 1/3. 2/3 is greater, right? So 2/3 is greater than 1/3. Okay, guys? So you should have a pretty good idea of how to compare our fractions using our tricks that we talked about, plus using our numbers, our fraction strips, okay? Before I send you off on your own, go ahead and flip it over. And I'm going to have you do 2 more with me before I send you off. Actually, I think we're gonna just do 1 more. Let's just do this bottom one, okay? Let's look at number 22. Whoops. Each of the fractions in the comparisons at the right refer to the same whole. Use benchmark fractions to reason about the size of each fraction. Select all the correct comparisons. All right, they're saying 2/3 is less than 2/4. Are they right? All right, well, let's think about this. The numerator is the same. That means we actually have to think opposite. So the 4, even though 4 is bigger, 2/3 is greater. And if we look, 2/3 right here, or 2/4 right here. So that one is not correct. Okay. Now they have 2/4. Oops, sorry. Is less than 2/3. They just flip-flopped them around. Okay. Numerator's the same. Look at the denominator. We actually pick the smaller denominator. That's the greater fraction. Would that one be correct? Yes. What about this one? 3/8 and 5/8. Look at the denominator. We love when the denominator is the same. So then the bigger numerator is the bigger fraction, greater fraction. They're saying 3/8 is greater than 5/8. Well, let's see. 3/8, 1, 2, 3, or 5/8. That one's not right. Go ahead and cross that one off. Okay. Which one? There's 2 more left. Let's see. 1/4 and 2/4. Denominator is the same. We look up at the numerators. The greater numerator is the greater fraction. So would this one be correct? Yes. What about 3/6 and 3/8? Do you think that's correct? Is 3/6 greater than 3/8? Well, we can do our trick, or we can use our fraction strips. You pick which one you think works best for you, and you decide. Would that be correct? Well, let's check both strategies. If the numerator's the same, we look down at the denominators. We know we actually pick the smaller number represents the greater fraction, okay? And if we look here, we've got 3/6, 1, 2, 3, and we've got 3/8, 1, 2, 3. 3/6 would be greater, so that comparison is correct. Kiss your brain, do the whoop whoop cheer. Hopefully you got that one right. All right, now I'm sending you off on your own. Please use this to help you, okay? Get your additional practice book out so that we can go over the problems that you're gonna do on your own. Go ahead and turn to page 163. Okay, you're gonna do all the problems on the front. The great thing about this one is they've got a fraction bar that you can look at right here to help you, okay? And the first couple ones ask which one's closer to 1 and which one's closer to 0. Well, look, they've got the 0 and they've got the 1. So that should help you, okay? So you're gonna do all of the problems on the front. And then I want you to flip it over. You are going to try number 11 on your own. That's going to be discussion post. Okay? Use your tricks and your strategies to help you. And then let's look at number 18. 18 is like what we just did. That's going to be your other discussion post. But instead of having to type in all these fractions with the comparisons, let's go ahead right now and make this one A, B, C, D, and E. So when you type in your discussion post for number 18, all you have to do is just say the letter. You don't have to type the whole fraction with the comparison, okay? And I will give you a nice, lovely hint because I love you so much. There will be 2 answers for this one, okay? So for your discussion post, you will type in 2 letters, A, B, C, D, or E, okay? So you will be doing the whole front, 1 through 10 on page 163. And then your discussion post will be number 11. You'll use the chart to help you. And number 18, okay? All right, good job. Remember our tricks. If the numerators are the same, we think opposite when we look down at the denominator. The smaller denominators, the greater fraction, right? And when the denominators are the same, we love those. Those are easy. Then we just look at the numerator and we pick the greater numerator has the greater fraction, okay? All right. All right, fabulous fraction friends. Peace out. I will see you later.